Hello and welcome to The Thought Project. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Nicola Spooner and I am a director at the Search Project. I've been recruiting for over 20 years and specialise in building project and transformation teams for law firms. And I started the Thought Project as a forum to share insights and advice on project management and helping the teams I work with overcome challenges and ultimately deliver better projects. We've got a slightly different approach today. Over the past few months, we've had lots of suggestions for topics for us to cover. Some of those we're working on for the next few sessions, but some of the ideas were quite smaller challenges that people were facing. So we've decided to host a project management Q&A to cover off some of those. We have quite a range of questions actually, so there's a lot to cover, but I have opened up the chat function. So any questions that you might want to ask live on the session, please do, and hopefully we'll get to all of those at the end. I have set it up to be confidential, so don't worry about what anyone else might think of the question. They will never know you've asked. Okay, so for anyone who doesn't know, I would like to introduce Jeremy Nicholls. Jeremy is a highly experienced project, programme and portfolio manager. He's delivered complex change across a range of industries and has worked in 4 law firms, so he's well qualified to offer advice on how to navigate your legal project challenges. Jeremy is also the author of The Everyday Project Manager and runs a project management training company delivering practical training courses to a wide range of corporates. Welcome, Jeremy, and thanks for joining us again.
Thank you for having me again. It's good to see you.
So we're going to kick off with one of the questions that have been submitted before our session started. I've never had to budget for my projects before, and now I do. Where do I start?
That's an excellent question. So it's interesting as well, because as you move through your project management career, you sort of tend to dig into different areas at different times. And if you've not done budgeting, yeah, that can be quite an overwhelming one. And it's obviously one of the sort of key tenets of project management. If you consider it to be like time, cost, and quality is like 3 of the key things you manage. It's all about the cost. So where to start is an interesting question. I'm a big fan of having a cost plan, but a cost plan that just isn't too complicated. You get a lot of people who get very carried away with Excel spreadsheets and really complex formulas, and you can get into stuff like calculating down to the penny and that sort of thing. I'm quite the advocate of keeping it simple, because most of the time, actually, even on very large projects, and I've managed some very large projects using very simple cost plans, it's just a few key questions that you need to answer to stay on top of your project budget. The key thing for me is to consider it in 3 sort of phases, and I like to think of this as sort of the past, present, and future. So the past being, what did we say at the outset this was going to cost? And that's effectively your project budget. What did we estimate when we started this piece of work that it was going to cost? And of course, one exercise you might like to get into around this is how to build that estimate up in the first place, and we can talk a bit about that. But in terms of managing the budget, understanding what was your budget at the outset, that's your past. Then look to the present. So what have we spent so far? So of that budget, how much has already gone? What are the things that we need to spend money on that we perhaps didn't think of in the original budget? And what are the things that we budgeted for that we actually now don't need? So what's our spend to date? And then from there, you look ahead to the future and go, right, what do we now need to spend to get to the end of the project? So never mind what was in the budget, never mind how much we've already spent. From here until the end of the project, there will be an amount we need to spend, regardless of how much we intended to spend. It might be that I hoped at the start it would cost £100, but there's no way around it. From here today, it's going to cost £200 more. And you need to be sort of honest with yourself about that when you're managing a budget. Don't try and pretend that you can do it for the budget when that's simply not possible. But when you look to the future, go, how much from today do I need to spend, and work out what it's going to take you to complete it. And I find that looking at those 3 figures, what we said we would spend, what we've spent so far, and when you add what we've spent so far to what we think we need to spend, you're going to end up at your total project cost. And if you do that for every sort of line item on your budget, everything that you thought you would need to spend at the outset, plus all the things that you now know you need to spend, you'll have a good idea at any point in time, where your project's going to come out. And the really, really key thing is to review that regularly. So don't do a cost plan and stick it in a drawer. Get it out. Genuinely, the management bit comes from looking at it regularly, understanding at any point in time where your project is, because sometimes you'll be running under budget because things are going well and actually that didn't cost as much as you thought it would, and actually you reckon you might come in there, and then something will change or something will happen, and actually now you've needed to spend money on something you didn't anticipate. And then it is constantly a balancing act, looking at the things and going, where can we bring things in a bit cheaper? Where are we going to need to spend money that we didn't anticipate? And that's an ongoing process. Cost management is an ongoing process, which is sometimes treated as a one-off exercise. There's a few things there, I think, but
there's lots there. I'm smiling because I'm thinking of my latest DIY renovation project where the plan of what we thought we would spend is clearly not what we need to spend to finish the project. So yeah, I think I could probably take some of that on board myself. Yeah,
well, hopefully, yeah, that's invariably that's something people will relate to.
Excellent. Hopefully that answers that question for people. Okay, this is an interesting one. So, what strategies can you use to support a project manager who's lost the confidence of the user group and their development partner?
Who's lost the confidence of the user group and their development partner? Okay, well, I mean, that's... And or their development partner. Okay. So, and we're talking about supporting the PM. So that's a really interesting question. So this is presumably someone who as a PM report to them, and I'm going to make a number of assumptions here in order to try and figure the way through the problem. But someone who has PMs working for them, and one of these PMs is struggling because presumably the project team or various stakeholders or this development partner no longer think they are the right person for the job. Perhaps they've lost their confidence. There's a few things to consider. I suppose the first is to understand why we think that's happening. So there's a number of reasons a PM might lose the confidence of their team or their stakeholders. And one of the ones is that it's all become a bit stressful, or there's been something go wrong, and or multiple things go wrong, and the PM just loses control of the project. And that can happen for a number of reasons, and we need to be sort of, we need not to pretend that every PM operates perfectly at all times. If that happens, the way you support the PM is by helping them to use project management to bring the project back under control.
Okay.
So what is very easy as a PM when there's issues to get caught up in the issue and the solution to the issue and trying to fix it, often trying to fix it yourself, rather than going back to the tools that project management gives us. So quite often the first thing to go out the window is the plan, whereas in fact that's the first thing you should be going to try and get things back on track, right? How has this affected our plan? What can we now do to bring the plan back on track? Which are the elements that are now blown, but which can we retrieve? Which can we salvage? So help them to control the things they can control first and foremost. So that's making the assumption that perhaps they've started to get involved with the issues or lost control of the project's life. So reminding them of those good project management principles, that basic project hygiene, a lot of the time will help fix the issues, and at the very least stop you being distracted by the noise and actually focus on the things that you need to focus on. One of those things as well is have they lost sight of where the project's going? Have they got bogged down in politics or like I say, issues management, or just lost interest? The PM needs to be a bit of a leader as well and maintain that direction at all times. And part of the reason that the others might have lost confidence in them is because they feel that the PM themselves has lost their way. Have they lost interest in the project? Are they basically engaging in less than perfect, leadership behaviors? Are they not, getting people aligned around what we're trying to do? Or are they sort of, engaging in generally bad business behaviours? Are they getting involved in the politics of it all? Are they, not perhaps behaving in an exemplary manner? And if you can coach them and guide them to the way you behaved in that meeting, perhaps there was another way you could have done that, will help perhaps if it is behavioural, getting them back on track. So I think there's a couple of ways to approach it. And the final one is if that occurs to me is if they're being seen perhaps as ineffective. Are they not being seen by their team and their stakeholders to be delivering? And the question then to ask is why? Why is that perception there? And how can you help the PM to be seen as delivering? Is it that they are delivering, but they're not shouting about it so that people aren't aware of all the good things they're doing? Is it that they're not, but they're not asking for help? So, do they need to be encouraged to, get the support? It's very easy to, be caught in an issue and not ask for help, to feel the need to resolve it yourself. But actually, the job of the PM is to rally all the people around who actually can bring something to bear on an issue. So I suppose I've covered a number of reasons that it might be, and not knowing the specifics of this situation, and it might be a generic question, but to try and understand some of the reasons why people have lost confidence in the PM, and therefore try and plug some of those gaps. And that's the key thing, is understand why it is they've lost confidence. There's no magic bullet to giving someone confidence in a PM, but the thing that will give people confidence in a PM is seeing them do the job of project management well, and it's really about supporting them to use the tools of project management to stay on top of things.
I guess confidence breeds confidence, right? So the more confident that project manager delivers their role, then the more confidence people will have in them.
Yeah, and it can take time. It can be a difficult cycle to break. And again, if this is, I've assumed a sort of level of line management responsibility, perhaps your role there is to give them a bit of air cover, protect them from some of those senior stakeholders while they get things back on track. Have the difficult conversations that say, look, there are some issues here, but we're sorting them out. You've got to give them a month while they figure it out, or whatever it is. So if this is a line manager role, do the line management job and support your team to whilst they figure out the stuff they need to figure out.
And it's very different, isn't it? It's managing a project team and managing project managers as a line manager. And I think those things can sometimes become quite blurred. That's a really important differentiator.
Absolutely.
Okay. An interesting one. I like this one. How do I successfully transition stakeholders so they work with the BAU team and stop coming to me?
Okay, so this is where presumably stakeholders, you've been working with a bunch of people over the life of the project, and now the project is shutting down and you're into business as usual, but they're still coming to you with all the issues, which happens because they've got used to seeing you, and also if the project's delivered quite well, they might be used to you as a person what gets things done, which is a terrible label to end up with, because people get you to do things. But I think, one of the jobs of project management, and I have to say, one that because of where it falls in a project plan, typically towards the end, we transition things. So towards the end is where it gets looked at and hurriedly handed over into BAU. Having a good transition plan that importantly writes you out of the equation is really important. So there are a couple of reasons why stakeholders might still be coming to you, and that is that they aren't getting the response they desire from the BAU team. But again, you need to dig into that because it's not your job to support this in BAU. So you either need to make, push back. I mean, it's totally valid to push back, but I suppose there's something that says if you haven't given them a clear route, or you haven't been clear enough around what their BAU process is, then of course they're going to come to you. So reiterating no, I've rolled off the project now. Here's what you must now do is really important, explaining to them what the process now is. But making sure that process, the BAU process, is robust, that it's going to meet the needs of the people who will use it post-project. And that actually starts much earlier in the project. So whilst it's unhelpful to say, well, did you put a good plan in 3 months ago? Obviously, at the point where people are coming to you, it's a bit too late to put in a transition plan. But actually, one of the things that stops that happening in general is having a good transition plan, a clear route into BAU, and communicating it early on. So you can have those conversations throughout the project. I'll deal with your issues now, but when this goes live, you'll have to go through this route, and making sure people are really clear on that. And actually, as part of that plan, write yourself out of the play, as it were. I can't make it so that you can't actually help people in BAU. And then it's really easy. So if you've got, for example, if it's a technology deployment, and as PM, you've had certain access into the system so you can maybe see what's going on, or you've been using it for demos or whatever, make sure those rights go away the second you go live. Because as PM, you probably should have them anyway. Make it so you can't help.
So it's physically impossible for you to actually help them.
Yeah. But also, if you're a PM and the project is now live, you are probably moving into the closure phase of the project, and you're probably starting to pick up your next one as well. You have to roll off and you're moving on, and you can be really clear about, I actually can't help you. I'm working on another project now, but here's the route that you must take. It's not enough, obviously, in business and in life generally, just to say, I can't help you.
Yeah.
What you want to say is, I can't help you, but here is the person that can. So yeah, it's about making sure there's, and it might be that there's something you can do there that says, actually, I didn't do a great job of support and transition here. That's why they're still coming to me. And maybe there's another loop I need to go around just to make sure some things are in place. And whilst that's a bit of extra work for you, in the short term, it's going to stop them coming to you over and over again in the long term.
That's a really interesting take on it, because I think, you can see it as being a victim of your own success, of having engaged stakeholders so much that they only want to work with you, but that's not your job. As you said, you've got other projects to go and work on. So building that into the plan is a really good way of making sure that transition can happen smoothly.
Yeah, and it's obviously it's lovely when people want to work with you, and over the course of a long project or even a short project, you can have built very deep relationships with people that you want to maintain. You don't want to say no to people, but if you enjoy working with someone, if you enjoy working with me, work with me as a project manager. I'm going to be a terrible support engineer.
Absolutely.
It's not my job. It's not what I do. So yeah, it is important to remind people of your role as well. I don't, if I've done an office fit out and installed a load of fridges as part of that, you wouldn't ask me to empty the fridge. So why are you asking me to support your IT system? It's being really clear about what the roles are.
Yeah.
And that the role they're asking you to do is actually not yours.
Excellent. I've got a really great one for you now.
Excellent. I don't know whether to be filled with trepidation by your joy in this.
You will never have been asked this one before, I promise you. How do you win over resistant stakeholders?
So we have resistant stakeholders, obviously, on projects all the time. I think the way you win over resistant stakeholders, I find it really interesting when people ask me this, because it's like, how do I win over another human? Well, the same way you win over anyone, right? Resistant stakeholders are just people who perhaps don't like what you're doing for one reason or another. And my answer is that the way you win over resistant stakeholders is the same way you win over any human that you want to either engage with you or see your way of being in some way. So for me, that comes down to two things. Listen to their concerns. Don't just go, well, this is happening and you can resist all you like, but it's happening, so live with it. You need to listen to their concerns for two reasons. One, it will really help you shape your change management plan. It might be that one person's being vocal about it, but actually they represent the views of, half the organization. So actually listening to those concerns is really helpful, because it will help you shape your change management plan, but also understand, there might be a really good reason why they're resistant to it, that you either need to bake into your plan, or you need to escalate back to your others, senior stakeholders, your sponsor, and that sort of thing. Someone's coming in, they were really resistant. I thought they were quite irritating at first, but then they made this really good point, and now I'm worried about that. Now I'm worried that we're doing all of this for nothing. Quite often the resistant, they're annoying, but quite often they will have a point. So first and foremost, listen to their concerns, listen to what it is. And sometimes it will just be whining. That happens. Sometimes it's, I just don't like the change that's happening, and I like using this old system, and now I've got to learn this new one and I don't like it. Okay. But again, that's something else we've understood there. And how do we make that easier for you? How do we make this transition more agreeable to you? And then a comedian friend of mine uses a great term, which is just as you would in the pub, just try and win the conversation. You don't worry if you go down the pub with your friends and someone disagrees with you. You just try and win the conversation. You chat with them, talk them through. Okay, so why do you think that? Okay, well, look, here's why I think it's a good thing. And have the conversation, have the debate. But that involves you understanding why you're doing it in the first place. So understanding why the project's there. What are the benefits? Why should this person care about what you're doing? Why is it a good thing for them? So you must have a really good understanding of what the project benefits are if you're to win over your resistant stakeholders, because the benefits are what we get as a result of doing the project. Don't worry about the detail of what you're actually delivering, because that's where people get very focused and very caught up. But actually, why are we doing this? And try and bring them on that journey, which you need to actually buy into yourself. If you don't, then you're a resistant stakeholder yourself. So if you're bought into it, bring them on that journey. Explain to them why you think it's a good thing. And finally, consider if you need to win them over. So you can invest a lot of energy in engaging with naysayers and people who are just going to be shooting a project down from the outset. Two things. Some people just won't be happy regardless of what you do. So don't, use your energy where it's most valuable. But some people might not like what you're doing. It is going to happen anyway. And actually, they might just need to get on board with that. And there's nothing more you can do to change their mind. And some people are actually appear to be resistant stakeholders. Actually aren't stakeholders at all. They're just people who have an opinion on what you're doing. And there are lots of those, particularly in law firms, where you do a big initiative and everyone has an opinion on what you're doing. But actually, some opinions are more valid than others. If you're a partner in that law firm, then perhaps your opinion carries more weight than depending on the project. But it's a good example within a law firm of someone whose opinion you might really need to engage in that. And finally, I just consider bringing in other stakeholders to help you with that message. You cannot engage, and it's not your job to engage with everyone that's affected necessarily by the project. Use your sponsor. Your sponsor's the champion of the project. The sponsor's the person who wants this thing done, who stands to gain most from doing it. So use them to help you drive the message out. Use your change management team. Use your business analysts. Use whoever's engaging with those people.
Yeah.
And actually identify other people perhaps in their department, not necessarily working for the project, who might act as champions for your project and help others around them to just come on that journey. That was a very long answer, wasn't it?
It's a very long answer, but
it's a really interesting question. I do like it because it's the human side of project management. It's nothing to do with the tools and the tricks.
That's the interesting part, right?
How do you talk to people?
What I liked there was understanding, are they actually a stakeholder? Because you're totally right. People can have an opinion about something that has no impact on them or very little impact, and you're trying to win them over because they're very vocal. So it's not always about the loudest person necessarily, but it's the person that genuinely has an issue with the change. That's a really good point.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and one of the first things you learn when you get into stakeholder management is like how much influence does a person have, and how much of a how negative or positive is their opinion, and that sort of gives you an idea of where you invest that energy. But yeah, they might be quite loud, but actually doesn't matter.
Excellent. Okay. What would you ask a project manager in an interview to see if they know their stuff?
I'm at risk of all sorts of things here. I'll never be invited for interview again. To see if they know their stuff. So the implication behind that question is you're trying to test their technical knowledge, if you like. I think it depends on what you're looking for, but I am always looking for someone who understands project management and will use project management approaches to deal with things, because that's why you hire a project manager, is to bring the project management skill set, right? So I quite often ask them around their process, their approach to various things. So how do you approach a planning session, for example, and do they show a good understanding of how a plan should be laid out? How do they approach a risk session? How do they engage people? And I think it's really interesting. That stuff is easy to do when things are going well. It's really hard to do when things are going badly, but it's the right thing to do when things are going badly. So I think asking people about the process they go through when things are going wrong is very telling. Do they go to the project management tool set? So do they revert to the plan? Do they look to their reports and escalations? Do they look to the governance and go, how am I using my stakeholder groups here to help me resolve the issue? So that's my go-to. But it occurs to me that you interview a lot more project managers than I do.
I do interview a lot of project managers, yes. That's a very good point, actually. I guess what I tend to do is understand what that particular role needs. So often when I'm taking a brief on a project manager role, there's a specific gap in that team or on that project that needs certain skills. So perhaps there's a lack of focus on planning, for example. So I would then create a couple of questions to tackle people's planning approach. Tell me about a time you've had to rescope a project. What happened? What was the situation? And those situational questions really help me understand how they think about things. So that's probably where I go to. And I use that technique across the softer skills side of things as well. But in terms of knowing their stuff, I think, yes, you can ask a whole heap of technical questions if it's relevant to a very technical project management role. But I, similarly to yourself, focus on that toolkit. But I also add that bit of what does this role need and what are the challenges that this project manager is going to face, and ask them the questions to see if they can stack up to that.
I think you said a really sort of interesting sort of key phrase there for me, which is how they think about things. I like to ask questions that sort of will tease out a response that shows me how their mind works, because then it doesn't matter what the situation is. If they think about it in a sort of structured and procedural way, they will find a way through it. And I think that's finding questions that will give you an insight into the way people think, I think is almost as important as being able to answer questions about the history of the Gantt chart, which is of minimal use to anyone.
Absolutely. And I think it does, when you ask those questions, people can surprise you. You might have, your initial impression isn't overly amazing, and then all of a sudden they're pulling out these amazing ways of thinking about things and structuring their thought process and how they overcome challenges. So it's a great way of starting on a very level playing field.
I love stepping away from an interview going, I wouldn't have done it like that, but I really like how they
Absolutely.
they make the interview far more enjoyable, but actually leave you with something like, I might try that next time. That's good.
Definitely. Okay, I might have to put a timer on this one because I know how much you love this subject. What information should I be including in my report?
It's reports. It's a wonderful question because yes, I think the reports are, as you know, Nicola, something of a soapbox issue for me. But I think they're a really important and often, if not underused, then misused tool. But I'm going to spare you your timer and boil it down to two things I think every report should contain. And reports can contain more things and perhaps should contain other things, but every report should contain your progress against your agreed baselines. So there should be some representation of what your agreed budget was and how you are performing against that budget. So going back to that earlier question around budgeting, what's your budget? How much of it have you spent so far? And where do you think you're going to land? That should be on every report. Your key milestones. So these are the dates that we agreed we would deliver things by. And those milestones, incidentally, shouldn't change week to week. I've seen reports where they chose different dates each week that they felt like reporting on. Interestingly, they were always green because they chose the dates that were doing best. But I've seen that happen. Choose agreed milestone dates and report against the same dates until you've delivered that top one, and then that one goes off and the next one comes in at the bottom. But report, what was the date I agreed I would deliver this by? What am I now forecasting this is going to come in at? And is that ahead or behind schedule? So progress against agreed baselines is one thing. And then risks and escalations. What are the things that might happen that people should worry about? And what are the things that I need you as the consumer of this report to do? I've specifically not said issues. You should record issues on a report, but if you've got an issue, don't wait until the next reporting cycle to talk about it. Yeah. Reports should obviously act as a record of some of the issues, but actually, if you've got something on fire, don't go, well, it's on fire, I'll just put that in my report and they'll read that next Tuesday. Your issues and escalations should happen straight away, but your report should act as a record. I've putting on record that I am asking or have asked for your help to resolve this issue. So progress against baselines, things that people should be worrying about, the risks, and any escalation actions that you need done. And there's a load of other stuff you can include in a report, but I would argue that most of the other stuff you could include is just additional detail, additional information, which is perhaps of interest, but not necessarily what you need to be reporting on. You need to be saying, here's how the project's going, here's where I need help. And that is at its core what your report should contain and why it's so important. And you should share it with everybody far and wide so everybody knows exactly how your project's doing and exactly where you need help and support. So yes, that's my view on what you should be including in your reports.
That was quite succinct. I'm very impressed.
Succinct for me, I thought.
Just in general, but also on that subject. Do you think there's a danger that people don't share those reports far and wide if they're not glowing in green?
I think there's a danger that they don't share the reports far and wide, whether or not they're glowing in green. I think people see reporting as an administrative process that they just have to go through, rather than an exercise which adds value to their project and is a useful tool for the PM to get awareness of what's going on and get support and that sort of thing. So I've always been very much in favour of sharing reports as widely as possible and not just sending it into the PMO each Friday or whatever it is, or to your sponsor and no one else. And actually what's a big thing for me, I think is very important in terms of using it as a comms tool within your own team. So you meet with your team hopefully relatively regularly, but it's a great thing to include your team when you do circulate that report to your senior stakeholders or whoever it is. Let's say you send it to your sponsor, copy the team in. Let them see what you are saying to other people about the report. Let them have the opportunity to go, you've said we're not going to hit that deadline. I actually think we might, but we need to do this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
Or you've exaggerated that risk because, okay, we did have a talk about it, but I think that's got out of proportion. So it gives your team a chance to engage with you as well. And they're the people who will help you out on most issues as well, let's not forget. So I think as well as communicating outside the project, it's really important to use it as a comms tool within the project as well, so that everybody is aware of the messages that are going out, of what's being communicated, and has a bit of a right of reply.
I'm not going to ask any more about reporting.
I wouldn't. I'll keep going. We'll be here till next Wednesday.
Okay, we've got a question that's come through from our chat today. So slightly different to the resistant stakeholders question we had earlier, but I'm struggling to engage the business in the change. Any suggestions of how to engage people in IT change when emails, team calls, etc. don't work?
Struggling to engage people in change. Okay. So that's interesting. It's a bit like it's you can see the parallels with our resistant stakeholders earlier. It's an interesting one specifically with reference to IT changes mentioned, so we might touch on that. But it does come to, if you're struggling to engage people in a change, then possibly it's because you're not making it something they should care about. so like if you tell me that my hot water is going to be cut off next week, I'm engaged. I care. If there's a reason I'm not engaged, it's because I haven't been given a reason to care. So again, understand the benefits. Why should people care about the change? Make sure that you are explaining the reasons that it's important to them, why this might be a benefit to them, why it might impact their day-to-day life, and therefore they just need to be aware of it, or whatever it is. Engagement comes from caring, and so give them a reason to care. It's interesting to say emails and calls don't really do anything. I don't know if anyone's ever really engaged with an email they've received. I engage with people, so I do find if you genuinely want to up your engagement, one of my go-to sort of tactics, if you like, would be to take it out of the virtual, take it out of email, and go and either talk to people. If there's a particular stakeholder that you're struggling to engage, or an area of the business, go and talk to them. But also consider whether there's other people who they would respond to. So using business champions, for example. Yeah. Where is the sponsor in all of this? Should the sponsor be going and talking to people and using those? There are people within a business whose role it is to communicate and gather excitement and investment in what we're doing. And it's not necessarily just the PM's role to do that. There are, you've got senior stakeholders who should be championing the change, from the sponsor all the way up. The project board, they commission these things to happen, and you've got people at the C level who should be, if the change is big enough and it's impacting enough, talking about it to all the people that they talk to every day of the week. There's another question around, I'm picking up more specifically on that point around engagement, but I think it's a really interesting one. There's a question as to whether they need to be engaged or just aware. How are we defining engagement? Is there something you are needing them to do, or do they just need to be aware? And how are you measuring that? If you send me an email, I will probably read it and be aware of its contents. But from your perspective, am I engaged? No way of telling. But maybe all you need is for me to be aware, and maybe that's sufficient. So it's worth just checking whether the people, whether everyone needs to be engaged, or whether actually I need these 6 people to be engaged, and they are, and I can do that on a regular weekly meeting or whatever it is. But everyone else just needs to be aware, and that's fine that they're not actually, asking me about this every time we pass each other in the corridor and that sort of thing. And the final point on the fact that it's an IT change is, is to bear in mind, and I've worked for many years as an IT project manager and learnt the hard way that the project is all consuming in my life, and the most important IT change the firm has made in years is still an IT change to everyone else. The business, using a law firm as an example, the fee earners, their job is to deliver the law, not to, and the IT is just something that helps them do that. So again, it's worth considering that most people aren't going to be engaged with that, and nor do they need to be. They just need to be aware it's happening. They need to be told what they need to do. They need to perhaps receive training, and this is all talking into getting into change management and how you move people through a change, which we discussed in our last webinar, video available. But that's a whole process. But it goes a long way beyond just getting a response from someone. But again, bearing in mind that whilst IT projects can seem huge to the IT project manager, to the business, they might not feel the need to engage. They just want to know when it will be done and will their system work on Monday morning when they turn it on. So again, I've learned this the hard way. I've been the IT PM who thought everyone should care much more about my project than they did. And actually, what I've had to learn is a little bit of humility that my project ain't the most important thing in town.
I think that's such a good point about IT projects, definitely. And I was thinking about your example of the water being turned off, and the amount of times I get a letter or something from the water board saying they're going to be doing something or other on this date down the road, and it gets filed in my whatever. But if they're going to tell me they're going to make an impact to my water supply, then that's a big difference. So similar kind of concept there. Do we have time for one more question? We've covered quite a lot already.
Sure.
Can we squeeze one more in?
Unless it's about reporting, in which case...
It's not about reporting. There's nothing more to say about reporting. Okay. What is the best approach for scoping the project timelines?
What's the best approach for scoping the project timelines? So by that, I'm taking it... I'm interpreting that as how do you approach a bit of planning? So understanding, how long a thing is going to take.
I would. That was what I would take. Okay.
Well, there's a few ways to approach that, but I suppose the first thing to do is I tend to think in terms of 3 passes. Understand the activities, so understand what it is that need to be done. So quite often, particularly when you're approaching a large piece of work like a project, it can seem quite overwhelming, and most of the project management methodologies will talk to a work breakdown structure, which is just fancy talk for breaking the work down into small pieces. Figure out what the big piece of work is, but then work out what are the little bits of activity, and then break them down. And all of a sudden, you've gone from a huge unmanageable thing to lots of little discrete activities, which in and of themselves are more than achievable. So understand the activities. That's your first pass. Second pass, understand who needs to be doing them. So have you got all the right people involved, and where are your sort of constraints? So I need that person to do it, and they're not going to be available till July. And then the third pass is to place all those activities in a plan, in a schedule that says, okay, well, that activity needs to happen first. Never underestimate the power of a blank wall and a bunch of Post-it notes for this, incidentally. Write all the activities down on the wall and then move them around until they all fit.
I've always wanted to do that.
It's terrific fun, and it's a really good way of, but it's there's a reason people do this all the time. It works. So lay it all out, and it doesn't have to be a huge great piece of brown paper and a load of Post-it notes, but just a bit of scrap paper on your kitchen table will do the same job. Move the things around until they all fit. You understand what needs to come first and when it needs to happen, and very quickly you'll get to a place where actually you've got a pretty good idea of it. Don't plan to the finest level of detail. Plan until you're confident enough, and you will and understand that you will have greater confidence in your near-term timescales than you will in your far-off timescales, and that's all right. So an activity you're doing next week, you probably know what day you're doing it on, and possibly even what time. An activity you're doing next year, you might know the month, and that's fine. So the further away an activity is, I talk about planning horizons in training and in the book. The further away an activity is, the more okay it is to not be 100% clear on the precise time. And the final thing I'll just introduce on this is, it comes back to reporting. It's better to be, when you're talking about it, when you're reporting on your timescales, it's better to be broadly right than precisely wrong. That is to say, it's better to say it will be in June and be broadly right than to say it'll be on June the 4th at 4:15 in the afternoon and be completely wrong when it delivered on June the 5th. So yeah, it is better to be broadly right. But yes, the closer a thing is, the more happy and confident you should be in the dates. And if you're not, that's a flag that you need to have a look and understand why you're not. But yes, break out the activities, understand who's going to be doing each of them. That's really important. It gets passed over. Got the activities, we put them in a plan, don't know who's doing them. That happens. Make sure that there's someone against it. And if you haven't got a name against an activity, that's a problem you need to fix.
Okay.
You don't have a plan you can be confident in until all of the activities have owners.
And do you own, and presumably those owners are the positions within the project team rather than the
role or person who's going to be doing that thing, or taking accountability. So it might be a team of people that's going to be working on it, but one person is going to be the person that you go to and go, is this done? That's the name you want on your plan.
Got you.
Having a name, and it should just be one name. You want to be going to one person, not a team of people, to understand if a thing is done, and holding them accountable for whether it's done. But also, one final point. This is a day on its own, but if that person should be the person telling you how long it will take.
Okay.
If I ask someone to come and build my extension, and I say, and they say it will take 3 months, that's their professional opinion of the time it will take them to do that activity. I can sit there all day long and say, I think you can do it in 1 month. And they could even go, well, we can try. But if they think it's going to take 3 months, then any time you take out of that is just increasing the risk it won't deliver. You bring experts in to do a thing. You can challenge their opinion, but you need ultimately to accept that that's the time they've said it will take them to do it. And if you don't like that, and you think it can be done quicker, go and find the person who says it can be done quicker, by all means, but then hold them to that.
I can feel a whole session on that.
It's comfortably a day.
I'll just wind you up and watch you go.
Not everyone would listen for that period of time, but I could certainly talk about it.
That's a whole different challenge.
Yeah.
We have actually run out of time, but we have covered off some of the questions that have come through today and some that have come through beforehand. I hope everyone's found that useful. I really enjoyed that. I like the variety. It was good.
It's been interesting to jump around my own project
putting you on the spot and challenging has been great fun. Thank you everyone for joining us. We have our next session lined up for the end of April, so we'll send some details through once that's all confirmed, and hopefully we will see you all there. Thank you so much, Jeremy. Oh, and before we go, if anyone needs to reach out to you for any of your expert advice.
Fantastic. Yes, you can find us at everydaypm.co.uk, where you can buy the Everyday Project Manager book, which goes into all these subjects in detail. But also what we're doing a lot at the moment is releasing a lot of videos via the website. So it's well worth looking out for those. We do have one on budgeting that's very popular at the moment. And we're releasing a follow-up very shortly. So particularly that early on budgeting question, we got loads of good stuff on that. Templates, the lot, everydaypm.co.uk. You can reach out to me through there.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And we will see you all soon.
Thank you very much. Bye, everyone.
Bye.